Good morning to you all. I am Samia Mouchene, third-year doctorate student at the University of Vrida. Regretfully, circumstances are such that I'm unable to be present for this symposium, but here is my presentation titled Reinventing the Frontier Myth in American Political Discourse from Proto-Territorial to Ideational Frontier. First, I will start with a definition of a key term here, frontier. A dictionary definition of frontier equates it to a border or boundary, a limit separating a country from another. To the American mind, however, the word frontier has a different resonance. The frontier evokes in the American imaginary a foundational myth characteristic of the American identity. Now, to make things a little bit simpler at the beginning of this presentation, let us use some visuals. So, for you and me, frontier is rather evocative of this space marked in red. It is some physical space, a territory if you wish. But for the American individual, the word frontier has multi-dimensional associations. If we are to suggest a few visual elements that can be said to be representative of the American frontier, the frontier, can evoke this. Or this, a lone cowboy in the midst of the wilderness. This, westward expansion, the Wild West and its settlements, again, cowboys. But the American frontier is also this, a soldier stationed somewhere far away overseas, right? In Afghanistan, for instance. The frontier to the American mind can also evoke this, space exploration. So these visuals are not meant to encompass the complexities of the frontier myth. As I said, it is just a means to introduce the notion of frontier myth. Now, I will attempt to clarify the frontier myth's genesis and dynamism, with particular focus on its reinvention and function in political discourse. Well, for the genesis, roots of the myth are to be found in the colonial period, with romanticized tales of the adventures of individual white men, the likes of Daniel Boone, here in the portrait, Davy Crockett and William Clark, who braved the wilderness, and I'm careful to use quotation marks, braved the wilderness and savagery of Native Americans beyond the Appalachian Mountains. The popular imaginary fed upon these exaggerated stories, which were later celebrated and sustained in folk songs, paintings, newspaper articles, literature, with, for instance, James Fenimore Cooper's Leatherstocking Tales, and history books like The Frontier Thesis of Frederick Jackson Turner. Well, since the 20th century, Hollywood has also played a key role in promoting the frontier experience through what has come to be known as the Western genre films. So, Richard Slotkin explains, myths are stories drawn from history that have acquired through usage over many generations a symbolizing function that is central to the cultural functioning of the society that produced them. In the end, myths become part of the language as a deeply encoded set of metaphors that may contain all of the essential elements of our world view. So the term frontier has thus acquired immense cultural value. The frontier myth now encodes central identity features into language. So American identity features are then implemented in the American mind through the narratives of the frontier. And these identity features can be summarized in three concepts that are recurrent components of the frontier myth. So these components I'm about to explain are ever present in all the narratives of the frontier. So these elements are individualism, violence, and heroism. So individualism encompasses resourcefulness and self-reliance, while violence is ever present in the frontier myth as justified and necessary in the face of the evil, uncivilized, undemocratic other. Because that is how the frontier myth works. It works through a binary opposition of a virtuous American figure as opposed to an evil other. This evil other has taken on several forms throughout history. It initially was the uncivilized, savage Indian. You also have the other as communism, as terrorism, as authoritarian regimes, and so on. And the list goes on. Well, for the third component, heroism represented by a white male American who takes on the role of a selfless savior. And here comes a sense of responsibility over the world in some sense. Politically speaking, the frontier myth has served to rally public opinion by evoking collective memory, thus activating nationalistic sentiments. So initially, the frontier was the physical space west of the Appalachian Mountains, and the frontier myth contributed in justifying westward expansion and the territorial advent of the American Empire. Well, President George Washington asserted of indigenous Americans that these savages were committing daily inroads upon our frontier, and that responsive measures there drew them nearer to the civilized state. So the myth features, again, are invoked here, mainly through the binary opposition of civilized American and savage Native American. And, well, the responsive measures here entail resourcefulness and action to save the natives from their savage state. But now, or today, in a world of mostly fixed, demarcated nation-state boundaries, one might question the relevance of the frontier myth. However, America continues to self-identify as a frontier nation with a frontier spirit, as termed by George Bush the son, or frontier mentality in the words of Barack Obama. Over usage, the frontier has in fact gained fluidity and new dimensions, further than territorial, to fit in a sense the time of the retelling of the myth. So one can assert that the frontier in the traditional sense, that is the Proto-Territorial frontier, disappeared by the turn of the 20th century as the United States political map became what it is today. That is, as its borders became fixed. So no more territorial expansion, or at least no more overt territorial expansion. The frontier now in political discourse is no more a specific territory, but an idea. And the idea is America as the center of freedom and some threat at the periphery that necessitates the intervention of the exceptional American frontier spirit, a spirit of resourcefulness, justified violence, and heroism. Now, elite political figures offer spins to the narrative, directing discourse in order to garner support for their foreign policy agendas. In modern and contemporary appropriations of the myth, elite politicians often have recourse to the wording freedom's frontier. The frontiers of freedom do not exist as frontiers in a conventional sense. In fact, US political elites have simply created an enticing fiction to justify vast overseas military deployments. So, where is the frontier? It is conveniently ambiguous. It is now not a territory, but a shifting idea, an attitude vis-à-vis world affairs. So, frontier narratives have been told and retold in a way that actually fits the political environment that surrounds the telling of the narrative. For example, in the context of the Cold War, Again, in the context of the Cold War, President Eisenhower explained that in South Korea, the United States maintained a bulwark on the frontier of the free world. And army pamphlets informed troops that in Korea, they stood face to face with our enemies on the edge of freedom's frontier. So here, the enemy was designed as communism, so the communism as a threat to the core belief system of the United States, that is democracy. And in the context of authoritarian regimes, President Obama argued that the world can take comfort in knowing that the men and women of the US armed forces in Korea are standing watch on freedom's frontier. And here again we see the recurrence of the features particular to the frontier, that is a hero nation, a hero virtuous nation, that is the United States, in the role of savior with a responsibility towards humanity, the responsibility of standing watch on freedom's frontier. President Trump also argued that the United States was engaged in Afghanistan on a modern-day frontier between barbarism and civilization. Thus, meaning is framed more directly around competition between democracy and non-democracy, authoritarianism, with the United States as a powerful force for freedom and democracy around the world. I will now conclude with some thoughts. Slotkin explains that the history of the frontier did not give US presidents the political scripts they followed. What they did was to selectively read and rewrite the myth according to their own needs, desires, and political projects. So rather than having conquered a once self-evident frontier, it is argued here that the United States has a long-standing tradition of producing and reproducing frontiers. Like some analysts termed this process as frontiering. So frontier as a verb, not as a noun, frontiering or frontier making. Over time, and rather than closing or disappearing, the frontier has been rewritten for new political settings and policy agendas. So here I come back again to the initial definitions of frontier I had given at the start of this presentation. So I said that in a dictionary definition for most non-American individuals, well, frontier is rather evocative of a limit, right, where a country ends and another begins. But for the United States, frontier is no limit because there is no limit. This is the final idea that I wanted to transmit to you. Thank you very much for listening. Your questions, comments, inquiries, critique are most welcome. I will be available to answer them during the discussion time. Thank you.